49ers Web Zone, No Huddle podcast, part of the Odyssey Network. I'm El Sacco. No Zane or Brian with us today, but I'm excited to open the show with our guest who played 7 seasons as an offensive lineman in the NFL, including time as a starter with the Cowboys and Bills. After his playing career, he dove into the media landscape with stints at SI.com, ESPN, before launching the RT Media, which hosts a number of football podcasts. He broadcasts games. There isn't much this guy doesn't do. He's everywhere right now. He is Ross Tucker. Ross, thanks for the time today.
Of course, Al, my pleasure. And that was a long-winded way of saying I'm trying to avoid a real job as long as I possibly can. You know what? So far, it's going pretty well. You know, it's funny, Al. My dad is 5'9", $165. And so never did I think I'd be an NFL offensive lineman for 7 years. But if you ask my buddies growing up, nobody likes football more than me, and nobody likes talking more than me. So they are convinced that God made me good enough at football so that I could have all these media gigs and all these podcasts that I do, because that's kind of what I always wanted to do. I mean, I think maybe till I was in 6th grade, I thought I wanted to play in the NFL, but then I looked at my dad and I was a late bloomer. I thought, well, that's not going to happen. I wanted to write for Sports Illustrated or be a broadcaster for ESPN or something. And it's kind of cool, man. I kind of feel like I've had 2 dreams come true.
And it's funny because, I listened to your show and I'm, I grew up in New York. I'm familiar with you from the Bills and everything like that. So it's interesting when I was researching you, though, when I knew we were going to have you on, I was like, wow, it's almost like his NFL career was a stepping stone to, just like you just said, just like even more. So you get to play in the league, and now here you are. You get to talk about what you love. You have the show. You get to broadcast games. You just have all this stuff going on. And you're a big beer guy, and so am I. So I follow you on Twitter, and I love that you do the show me your beer thing. And I'm into craft beer. I'll sit, like I said, I'm a New York guy. I'll drink Labatt Blues with you, Ross. I love it. I love it all. What are some of your go-to beers or breweries?
Well, first of all, great question. And that show me your beer thing is really taken off. I don't know why I did the first time. I was just having a nice beer and I took a picture of it and I just said hashtag show me your beer. And the amount of guys and gals that reply with the beer that they're drinking when I post that on a Friday night or a Saturday night, it's pretty awesome. It's really awesome. In fact, I've been able to get really good engagement from it and work a couple deals with different breweries as a result, including Labatt Blue and Vitamin C Brewing up in Weymouth, Mass, which is a big favorite of mine. I don't know what it is, Al. And by the way, just a note, okay? I have not been in Santa Clara for a Niners game since the NFC Championship where they beat the Packers. So it's been a while, so this might have changed. But the 2 things, Al, that are really important to me are beer and press box food. Food in general, but in particular press box food. Now, it was the NFC Championship game where the Niners, Raheem Mostert, just ran over the Packers. I mean, bad. Real bad.
Yeah.
And I just remember the press box food beforehand was delicious. And then I was flying on a red eye back to the East Coast that night. And after the game, I think it was Kevin Harlan and Kurt Warner are doing the post-game show, but I already did my interviews. So I'm done. I'm just up in the press box waiting for those guys to finish up because we were all taking a car to SFO. The Niners have anchor steam in their press box after games. And Al, you probably know this, but that's rare for NFL teams to have beer. So I had a few. I may have brought a few more with me for the trek in the car, not driving, but the trek in the car to SFO, just to kind of ensure that I could sleep on the red eye. and I like the anchor steam. That was good. I will say this. Last year I had a fan or a listener or whatever make a trip up to Treehouse Brewing.
Yes, sir.
Outside of Worcester, Mass.
Yep.
That stuff, especially Julius,
fantastic.
It is just delicious, man. I mean, it is so good to the point, and I have this picture out to the point where after we picked up our daughters from camp at New Hampshire, I drove back right through Treehouse and I got like 5 cases and it lasted me all through the football season. It was tremendous, just tremendous.
It's phenomenal. So I'm going to put another brewery in your head. So I love Treehouse too. And again, I'm an East Coast guy. There's a brewery in Albany. It's fairly new, Albany, New York, called Fiden's. Just as good as Treehouse, if not better. So if you could ever kind of get your hands on that, they're local and they don't. Fidens.
Okay.
So they're just as good as Treehouse, and they're just maybe a couple of years they've been out. And around here, there's lines like across the street, like they sell out really quickly. So yeah, outside of Albany, New York, it's a big brewery. So definitely check that out if you can.
Good to know. Okay, cool.
All right, Ross. So you recently ranked the NFL's head coaches, and you ranked Kyle Shanahan 6th, with only Andy Reid, Bill Belichick, Mike Tomlin, Sean Payton, and Nick Sirianni ahead of him. I actually thought that was pretty fair. I'd kind of put Shanahan in the 6 to 8 range, if you ask me, I think. What is it about Shanahan that makes you think he's become an upper echelon coach in the league?
Well, so what is it? 3 out of the last 5 or 6 years, they've gotten the NFC Championship game with Jimmy Garoppolo or Brock Purdy as their quarterback. You know, if you look at conference championship games and the appearances and the teams that make it there, they almost always have elite quarterbacks. So for him to get there, whatever it is it 3 in the last 5 or 3 in the last 6, Al? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
3 in the last 4.
3 of the last 4?
Mm-hmm. 2019, wow. 21 and 22, yeah.
Yeah, to be able to do that with guys that are not elite quarterbacks, they're not even top 10 quarterbacks, they might not even be top half of the league quarterbacks, is extremely impressive, right? Like the Bills fans, and listen, that was my favorite team I played for. They're all mad at me because I have Sean McDermott at 22. I think Sean McDermott's a good coach. That was actually one of the things I learned from the exercise of ranking coaches is there's a lot of good ones. I mean, 23 was Stefanski, 24 was Frank Reich, 25 Saleh. I actually think those guys are pretty good. Like if they were the coach of my team, I'd feel pretty good about it. But you know, McDermott has had Josh Allen for 5 years starting at quarterback, who's a top 5 quarterback. They've made 1 conference championship game and 0 Super Bowls, right? I mean, Mahomes is 6 for 6 going to conference championship games. Mm-hmm. Burrow is basically 2 for 2 when he's been healthy. He got hurt his rookie year. Even Jalen Hurts in his second year as a starter went to 1 last year. I think that's a knock on McDermott that he hasn't been able to get the Bills to more at least conference championship games, let alone Super Bowl. And I think it's a huge feather in the cap of Kyle Shanahan. You know, I know the knocks on Kyle in terms of, you know, a couple of Super Bowl fourth quarter collapses. I also know they've had their share of losing seasons in San Francisco, but 3 out of 4 NFC championship games with the guys he's done it at quarterback is extremely impressive to me.
And I got to go to the quarterbacks next because it feels like you can't talk about the 49ers without some kind of QB drama, especially lately. And this offseason's been no different because you have Purdy's health, you have the Sam Darnold signing, and just the way everything with the Trey Lance situation has played out. What's your take on the San Francisco QB situation, and how do you see it playing out?
So I have a question about that first, because sometimes I feel like maybe I'm missing something. So a year ago, they basically didn't have Jimmy show up for anything,
right?
Because Trey Lance was the guy, right?
Yeah.
And then they couldn't get what they wanted for Jimmy or whatever. But then Trey Lance gets hurt. It was the opener, right?
Second game. First quarter of the second game. Yeah.
What happened between then and now that it feels out like they really don't like Trey Lance? I mean,
so this is what
let me just finish my comment. Like when they talk about Purdy, it's just glowing, whether it's Kyle or John Lynch. And I know both those guys. I like both those guys. Even the Darnold, they're like, they love talking about how great Darnold is. And I see the reports from like Barrows or Mayoko saying might be the best thrower of the football the Niners have ever had, which is hilarious, by the way, like absolutely comical to me. And then like they get asked about Trey Lance, and they're basically like, "Yeah, he's here too." Like what happened between him getting hurt that second game and now that they went from we're moving on from Jimmy, Trey's the guy, to it's pretty clear they don't like Trey and they'd like to move on from him and trade him if they could.
This is what I think. So if you go back to that 2021 offseason, Matthew Stafford's available and the Niners are interested. He goes to the Rams. Then they have a package that they're willing to put together for Deshaun Watson, but he has his legal issues. And then after that happens, they make the trade with Miami. So I kind of feel like they had that package ready for Watson. And when that fell through, they panicked and they traded up because they were so worried about their window and Jimmy's injuries. That's kind of where I think where they were. So they panic and they bring in this guy who's one of the greenest quarterbacks we've ever seen come into the league, right? Barely played. They put him into the team, and then
I still don't even think that's who they want. I still think Kyle wanted Mac Jones.
And he may have been talked into Lance. So Lance comes in, and then he's clearly not ready. He hurts his finger. Jimmy comes in, gets hurt again. He played through the NFC Championship game, but he played injured. And then they fall short again, probably because of the quarterback position, because they weren't scoring. So then the next year they say, okay, we're going to go with Lance, but Jimmy's still kind of hanging there. It was a really weird situation. Thankfully, because Lance gets hurt. Now I think fast forward, what happened was they're ready to win now. And I think their window is only another year or two with the core. You know, George Kittle, Trent Williams, these guys aren't going to play for 3, 4, 5 more years, probably at this level. So they saw what Purdy can do, and they were kind of like, oh shit, we can win now with this guy. So now they're ready. Okay, we're ready to win now. They don't want to live with the bumps and bruises with Trey Lance and hope he develops. I just think that they're ready to say, okay, we need to capitalize on this window. It's hard. You know this. You played in the league. It's very difficult to get to an NFC championship at all, let alone 3 out of 4. To get there 4 out of 5 years with a guy who's still developing, they may just feel like we got to go with the guy who's ready to get us there now. That's what I feel like. And Trey, whether it's fair or not, is now on the outside looking in because he's not in a spot where he's going to be able to develop.
Yeah, I guess I feel like it made all the sense in the world to me with Purdy having this injury to kind of have those two guys battle it out. If Trey Lance has to start the season and plays well, maybe leave him in there. If Purdy can play, have Trey as the backup. I understand getting Darnold because both those other guys were coming off of injuries, but it's been how glowingly they've spoken of Darnold and the exact opposite of how they talked about Lance. It's been stunning to me about that. Because even if you want to trade the guy, which I think they do, you'd still think they'd at least say something positive about it. They won't even do it.
And Ross, they went after Darnold like day one of free agency. So he was a priority for them. And not that he was going to start for anybody, but I would think teams would want him as a backup. So for him to come into this situation, who knows what was said? It's crazy. And that's maybe the one knock on Kyle Shanahan from 49ers fans is like, what is he doing with this quarterback situation? He kind of doesn't know what he wants. And it's like the guy jumping around to the different girlfriends. It just kind of feels weird. And that could be the one thing that really upends this phenomenal roster. So we'll see how that goes, but it's been crazy. So I did want to ask you before we got to let you go. The running back position in the NFL is at a point where there just doesn't seem to be a lot of value at the position in terms of teams wanting to commit dollars and things like that. And I think mainly because teams may feel like they can get similar production in different places or from cheaper guys. And when a guy's ready for a new contract, they can just get a younger guy. But there are some exceptions. And Christian McCaffrey, I think, is one of them. And the 49ers went to number 1 overall in DVOA and EPA per play after McCaffrey was inserted into their lineup. Do you think the league will adjust to Kyle's offense with McCaffrey this year, or is he just such a phenomenal weapon for them that they're going to continue to dominate with him?
Well, I think Kyle Shanahan's the best. Kyle Shanahan and Andy Reid are the best offensive play caller, play designers in the league. And I'd have to go through the list. You know, I'm just sitting here in my house, but off the top of my head, I think it might be by a decent margin. Extremely impressed by those two guys always. I don't think that they will adjust. I think that there's more there for Kyle to use McCaffrey. And I think that the pendulum, Al, has swung a little bit too far in the wrong direction when it comes to running backs. I understand. I've seen the numbers. I've seen the running backs don't matter, which I always kind of laugh about, right? Like when they say running backs don't matter, I'm like, okay, why don't they put Al Sacco at running back then for the league minimum?
That
You know what I mean?
wouldn't be pretty.
Like they're not going to do that, right? So they do matter, right? And I don't know. There's enough teams out there, whether it's the Niners, like everybody watching this or listening is a Niners fan. You cannot have watched that team play after they got McCaffrey last year and told me he didn't make a difference in the outcome of games, wins and losses. I mean, I was on the sideline for the NFC Championship game. That touchdown run he had against the Eagles, I mean, obviously they ended up losing and the quarterbacks got injured. That was one of the sickest runs, Al, I've ever seen in my life. Like, we don't talk about that McCaffrey NFC Championship run nearly enough. If the Niners won that game, we would be talking about that run forever. That was incredible. And, I do a lot of Brown stuff. You're going to tell me Nick Chubb doesn't make a difference in the outcome of games? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's swung a little too far to the point where there's going to be a team, and maybe the Niners last year were that team that capitalizes and actually gets value in a running back for, a trade or the dollars that they're giving them. And I think McCaffrey is as good of an example as any.
Ross, I could sit here all day and talk to you. So many questions, right? I know you got to go. I appreciate the time. You are always welcome on the show. Thank you so much.
Al, two things. Number one, it's my pleasure, and we have plenty of time before training camp or before the season starts. So just reach out to try to get me on again. I'd love to do it. And number two, for those of you that are interested in other podcasts, I got a betting podcast, which is really popular, the Even Money podcast. If you like fantasy football, I have the Fantasy Feast podcast. Obviously, I do the Ross Tucker Football podcast daily, which a lot of people enjoy. They're all 25 minutes or less, too, by the way. So it won't occupy too much of your time. I know you got to watch or listen to No Huddle first for your Niners talk, but if you have a little bit of time left over, check out one of my other shows.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Al.
Bye-bye. All right. Thanks so much again to Ross Tucker. That was awesome. He's a fun guy. You have to check out his show, especially his daily show. It's great. He's really passionate about the game. He's passionate about food and beer. I'm an Italian guy. I'm passionate about all those things too. So he's phenomenal. All right, really quick, I wanted to hit on a couple things, just a couple newsy type things that came out with the Niners, and then maybe one or two other things. But there's nothing going on right now. So everything that dominates the news cycle for San Francisco is with the quarterback. So some people may be sick of it, but it is what's going on right now. And Albert Breer was on Colin Cowherd, and he said a couple things that have kind of been all over Twitter. And it's just sort of the thing that Ross was just talking about, where what's coming out about Trey Lance just isn't positive, and it's coming from somewhere. So the fact that all this stuff is getting put out there, there's just not, it doesn't seem like there's confidence or any kind of momentum around him, which I just think it's sad again, because I know the team has seen him in practices. We really haven't seen him on the field, and we talked about it. He's one of the greenest prospects to ever come out of college, ever. So to kind of make, I don't know, these statements on him at this point seems a little crazy to me. But Breer said, I think if Brock Purdy were unable to take the first snap of training camp, and that's certainly a possibility, although he's on track to play in week 1, but they're still building the strength in his arm back up. Then he said, I think Sam Darnold might take the first snap of training camp. Now, it doesn't mean Trey Lance can't come back and work his way forward, but I think that they feel like they've already given this guy a lot of chances. A lot of chances? He's played 4 games. A lot of chances? In one of the games, his finger was hurt. Another one was in a monsoon. There's no way he's had enough game time chances. And I understand he may not get them with a team that's ready to win now, but to say that he's had chances, I thought it was absurd. I thought it was absolutely absurd. So the Niners are ready. We've said it. The Niners are ready to win now. And he did make one good point where he said that you're not talking about developing the best quarterback for the playoffs. You're talking about a guy who can keep you afloat for a month, right? Right. That would probably be Sam Darnold over Trey Lance at this point, even though Lance has a higher ceiling. So that at least makes sense to me, in that if the Niners feel like, okay, Purdy's not going to be ready till October, it doesn't look that way, but let's say for argument's sake, it's going to be 4 games without him. Who just is not going to mess up? even though Sam Darnold is a turnover machine, but that's another story. Who is not going to mess up? Who's going to come in and just kind of run the offense and not make the backbreaking turnover? Are they going to feel it's Darnold? And if you watch the way Kyle Shanahan used Trey Lance, that told you everything you needed to know. He didn't want him to throw. He had him running. He had him running QB powers and sweeps and everything else, or whatever, off tackle, I should say. He didn't seem like he had any faith in him to throw. So that should tell you everything you know right there. So regardless of what they saw in practice or in the offseason, I don't know. It just looks like the writing's on the wall here. And these reports are going to continue to come out. And we have to continue to talk about it, I guess, because it's news. But I personally, you guys, I cannot wait for training camp. And I feel like I say this every offseason that like I just want this offseason to end. And I want training camp to get here because I'm so sick of like the QB drama and on the hamster wheel with the QB and everything like that. You say, Al, why are you still talking about it? Because we have to, because it's news. Because that's what dominates the news cycle. That's what's dominating the 49ers. Y'all are listening to this podcast and you root for a team that is you hope is going to win a Super Bowl this year or next year. How can you do that with questions at the quarterback position? How? How do you do it? And this is a team like we've never seen before. Ross just said usually the teams that go to 3 out of 4 NFC championship games or championship games, I should say, they have an elite QB. Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Joe Burrow has gotten there the past couple of years. Even if you go back to those Andy Reid Eagles teams, Donovan McNabb was an elite QB at that point. If you look at the quarterbacks in the league back in the early 2000s, McNabb was probably top 5. There were not a lot of great quarterbacks playing in the early 2000s. You had Manning and Brady who were young, and probably I know Brady was winning Super Bowls, but certainly wasn't at his peak yet. Manning wasn't at his peak. Kurt Warner, I don't even know if was starting at that point. Brett Favre was kind of in a weird spot. There weren't great quarterbacks. McNabb was one of the best. So they had elite QBs. For Kyle Shanahan to do what he's done, it's incredibly impressive, but also incredibly frustrating because you have this roster that is absolutely loaded and ready to win now. And we just keep talking. Was Jimmy good enough? Is Trey ready? Is Purdy healthy? And meanwhile, you have this talent everywhere and you just want to tear your hair out. Like, we're ready to win. We're ready to win this championship. Like, let's just get a quarterback in there who can make it work. And we hope Purdy can do that. Saw a quote today with Jeremy Fowler. And I thought this hit the nail on the head. We've kind of said this on the show before. Jeremy Fowler said, I'm going to keep going back to this. The most important catalyst in San Francisco is Kyle Shanahan, right? It's really his baby for the most part. And just from what I heard when I asked about Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, it's just that Brock is in tune with Kyle. He does what Kyle wants. He runs the offense he wants. I think that it just absolutely hits the nail on the head. Kyle, for better or for worse, wants an extension of Kyle out on that field. He wants a quarterback who's going to go in and say, this is the play. This is where the ball goes. And if the play blows up or there's a rush, that quarterback has some escapability. He doesn't have to be Lamar Jackson, just that he has that escapability. And you saw that with Purdy, where he ran the offense very well. Sure, he's a rookie and he missed throws and everything like that. But for the most part, I think the ball went where Kyle wanted it to. And he showed that escapability. He's not a crazy scrambler, but he's got that fast twitch and he's able to get out of trouble. We've seen him make plays, the throw to Kittle, right? In the divisional round, where we've seen him make plays where it's off the cuff and he's got to move around and he's able to make the throw. The throw that I always point to where I was like, yeah, these two are on the same wavelength. And I don't even remember the game. I'm sorry. I want to say it might have been against Seattle in the playoffs, but don't quote me. Anyway, Debo is going across the field and he's wide open. And Purdy throws post the end zone that Brandon Ayuk was running, and Brandon Ayuk broke off his route. So it looked like where the hell are you throwing the ball? But Ayuk broke off the route, and they panned to Purdy with the camera, and Purdy's like, "Why didn't you go? Why didn't you finish the post?" And then they pan to Kyle on the sideline, and he makes a motion with his hand like, "Why didn't you finish the post?" So even though Debo's streaking wide open, it was clear that both Purdy and Kyle wanted the ball to go to Brandon Ayuk. Clear. And I think that's just it. That's the extension Kyle wants out there, and that's why he loves Brock Purdy so much. Now, we've talked at nauseum what Brock Purdy did scoring points, how great he was, how clutch he was. I talked about him even in the Cowboys game where you could say in the divisional game did he struggle a little bit? He was going against one of the best defenses in the league. And I make the analogy where it's like a starting pitcher who maybe doesn't have his best stuff, but he just has to get outs. That's what Purdy did. He made the throws when he had to. He made some clutch throws at the end. He makes the off the cuff throw to George Kittle. He did all those things. So he proved that he can be a clutch player. So that's where I think all the stuff I think Kyle sees in him. Now moving forward, we'll see. Does the league catch up? Is he healthy? Because Brock Purdy, in a lot of ways, maybe the most important quarterback in the league this year, because he is piloting maybe the best roster in the league, a roster that's ready to win now, a roster that has committed big money to the left tackle position, to the receiver position, to the linebacker position, to the defensive tackle position, that's about to give a record contract to Nick Bosa. They have built this just phenomenal roster, and they just need Purdy to do what he did last year. Because if he was healthy, the way that the defense played against Philadelphia, Jalen Hurts was phenomenal in the Super Bowl. He had about 120 yards passing in the NFC Championship. Niners might have won that game if Purdy was healthy. And then, against Kansas City, you take your chances. But if he can do what he did last year, this team is ready for the Super Bowl. But if he can't, if there's a regression, what happens? So the Niners are really taking a chance with the quarterback room going into it with this roster. I'm confident. I'm a big Brock Purdy guy. I'm a big guy in terms of Trey Lance, what he can do. Sam Darnold, people can tell me he's a perfect fit for Kyle Shanahan all they want to. I got to see it, man. Got to see it. He turns the ball over. Some dudes just turn the ball over, and I think Sam Darnold is one of those guys. So I have to see it. Hopefully, we don't have to see it. Hopefully, we have a quarterback play every single game for the first time since 2019, and before that, since 2014 with Colin Kaepernick. Hopefully, we finally have a quarterback that can do that can stay on the field and play the whole season and get you deep into the playoffs. And you don't have to worry about going through 3 or 4 guys. I mean, it's ridiculous. I see these talk shows. They were talking about Good Morning Football today, and they were like, yeah, well, they may need all 4 guys. They want to keep all 4 guys. That's ridiculous. You're not talking about that with the Bills or the Chiefs or Cincinnati. Yeah, Cincinnati better pick up 3 more quarterbacks, and nobody's saying that stuff. So to say it with the Niners, it's just it's frustrating. So I'm ready for it to be over. I'm ready for this team to have a quarterback on the field for the whole season, and let's see what we can do. Let's see what the peak is for this roster because it's absolutely loaded. So it's going to be exciting, you guys. All right, so I want to thank Ross Tucker again. It was an awesome interview. I want to thank you guys for listening. Subscribe to the show if you haven't. Give us a rating if you haven't. A good rating, like the show. I appreciate y'all. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.